going to tell you exactly how it happened because even now it doesn't feel real. My father said it at the Christmas dinner table loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your presence would lower our status," he said, staring straight at me like he was delivering a verdict. My mother didn't argue. My brother smirked into his wine glass. The conversation moved on just like that, and I was officially banned from the family's luxury Christmas trip. What none of them knew was that I wasn't hurt in the way they expected. I stayed quiet, nodded once, and let them believe the story they'd always told themselves about me. The truth was simpler and far more dangerous to their pride. A week later, we arrived at the island resort together. They assumed I was tagging along as an inconvenience. That illusion lasted right up until the resort manager stopped walking toward my father, turned to me instead, and smiled. "Welcome back, Ms. Hale," he said, offering his hand. "The presidential suite is ready, as always." My brother nearly dropped his bag. My father's face was drained of color, because at that moment they learned I wasn't a guest. I was the owner. And that was only the beginning of what they'd hidden from me and what I was finally done hiding from them. But let me go back to that dinner table, to the night everything changed. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon, the way it always did during the holidays. My mother had spent 3 days decorating every corner, arranging the ceramic angels and the hand-blown glass ornaments she collected from estate sales. The tree stood in the living room window, visible from the street, because appearances mattered in our family more than anything else. I arrived at 6 exactly on time. My brother Evan was already there, lounging on the leather sofa with a drink in his hand, scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up when I walked in. My mother kissed my cheek and immediately commented on my coat, something about the color not being festive enough. My father sat at the head of the dining table, reviewing something on his tablet, already positioned like a king awaiting his court. Dinner was roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, 3 kinds of vegetables, and a tension so thick I could taste it between every bite. The conversation circled around the upcoming trip, the resort, the exclusive island, the people they would meet there. "The Hendersons will be there," my mother said, spooning gravy onto her plate. "And the Castellanos, very connected family. Richard met the husband at a conference last year." My father nodded without looking up. It is important to maintain those relationships. This trip isn't just a vacation, it's positioning. Evan leaned back in his chair. "I heard there's a golf course designed by some famous architect, and the spa is supposed to be incredible." I listened, cutting my meat into small pieces, saying nothing. I had learned years ago that my contributions to these conversations were tolerated, at best, ignored, at worst. So I waited, wondering when the inevitable would come. It came between the main course and dessert. My father set down his fork, wiped his mouth with the cloth napkin, and looked directly at me for the first time all evening. "Claire, we need to discuss something." The table went quiet. Even Evan stopped chewing. "Your mother and I have been talking," he continued, his voice measured and deliberate, "and we've decided it would be best if you didn't join us on this trip." I felt my spine stiffen, but I kept my face neutral. "May I ask why?" He didn't hesitate. "The people will be around the environment. It requires a certain presentation, a certain standard, and frankly, your presence would lower our status." The words hung in the air like smoke. My mother studied her wine glass. Evan's smirk returned, poorly concealed. "We'll bring you something nice from the island," my mother offered, as if that could soften the blow. I looked around the table at these people who shared my blood but had never shared my struggles. I had paid my own way through college. I had built my career from nothing while Evan coasted on family connections. I had spent my entire life being told I wasn't quite good enough, didn't quite fit in, wasn't quite what they wanted. And now this. "So that's decided," I asked, my voice steady. My father nodded, once satisfied that the matter was closed. He picked up his fork and resumed eating, and just like that, the conversation moved on to which restaurants they wanted to try and which outfits my mother had packed. I excused myself before dessert, claiming an early morning. No one protested. No one asked if I was okay. I drove home in silence, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind racing. They had no idea what they had just done. They had no idea who I had become while they were busy deciding I was unworthy. At my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the darkness, looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed. An email notification. I opened it and scanned the contents, a quarterly report from the resort's management team detailing occupancy rates, revenue projections, and upcoming renovations. I signed my response with the name they knew but had never connected to the woman they dismissed at dinner tables. Claire Hale, majority shareholder, owner. 3 years ago, I had invested in a struggling luxury resort through a venture capital fund I had built piece by piece, deal by deal, while my family assumed I was barely getting by. The investment had paid off spectacularly. The resort had transformed into one of the most exclusive destinations in the Pacific, and my stake had grown with it. I had never told them. At first, it was because I wanted something that was mine alone, untouched by their judgment, unsullied by their expectations. Later, it became something else entirely. A test, perhaps. A way to see if they would ever value me for who I was, rather than what I could offer them. They had failed that test spectacularly. I replied to the email confirming my arrival date, requesting the presidential suite, and asking Michael Grant, the general manager, to keep my ownership discreet until I indicated otherwise. Then I booked a flight, the same destination as my family, arriving the same day. A week later, I watched them gather at the airport, their designer luggage gleaming under the fluorescent lights, their voices carrying that particular pitch of excitement that came with impending luxury. They didn't expect to see me there. The look on my father's face when I appeared at the gate was almost worth the years of dismissal. "Claire!" My mother's voice was sharp with surprise. "What are you doing here?" I smiled the kind of smile I had perfected in boardrooms. I decided to take a vacation after all. My father's jaw tightened. "We discussed this. The arrangements are made. You can't just—" "I made my own arrangements," I said calmly. "Don't worry, I won't interfere with your trip." They exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that families develop over decades of shared dysfunction. But there was nothing they could do without making a scene, and scenes were precisely what my father avoided in public. So they tolerated my presence on the flight, my father in first class pretending I didn't exist, my mother making awkward small talk about the weather, Evan retreating into his headphones. I sat several rows behind them, content in my silence, watching the clouds roll past my window. When we landed, the tropical air hit us like a warm embrace. The resort had sent a shuttle, a sleek vehicle with tinted windows and leather seats. My family climbed in first, claiming the best spots, leaving me to squeeze in at the back. The drive wound through lush vegetation, past white sand beaches and crystal-clear water, until finally the resort came into view. It was breathtaking, a collection of elegant buildings cascading down a hillside toward a private cove, all glass and natural wood and carefully manicured gardens. My family emerged from the shuttle with the eagerness of people who believed they had arrived where they belonged. They had no idea that every inch of this paradise, every perfectly placed flower, and every inch of finished wood and polished stone existed because of decisions I had made. The lobby was cool and fragrant orchids arranged in massive glass vases, water features murmuring in the background. Staff in crisp white uniforms moved with practiced efficiency. My father approached the front desk with the confidence of a man accustomed to being served. And then Michael Grant appeared from a side door. He was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my father's entire wardrobe. His eyes swept the lobby, passed over my family without lingering, and landed on me. His face transformed into a genuine smile. He walked directly toward me, hand extended. "Welcome back, Ms. Hale," he said, his voice warm and professional. "The presidential suite is ready, as always." My brother nearly dropped his bag. My father's face went white, and I realized, standing in that moment, that this was only the beginning. The silence that followed Michael Grant's greeting was the loudest sound I had ever heard in my father's presence. For 32 years, Richard Whitmore had controlled every room he entered, every conversation, every decision. He was the gravitational center of our family, and the rest of us were merely satellites caught in his orbit. But in that lobby, with Michael's hand still extended toward me and my family frozen in confusion, the gravity shifted. I shook Michael's hand, noting the slight tremor in my father's jaw, the way my mother's hands gripped her purse strap, the bewilderment clouding Evan's features. "Thank you, Michael. It's good to be back." Those 5 words rearranged everything they thought they knew about me. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, you need to understand what came before. You need to know the story of the girl they decided was never quite enough. I was 16 years old when I learned that my place in the Whitmore family was negotiable. It was my birthday, a milestone I had been anticipating for months. My friends at school had been planning a small party, and my mother had promised something special at home. The morning of my birthday, I woke up early, excited in a way that only teenagers can be. I came downstairs to find my parents huddled in the kitchen speaking in low voices. When they saw me, they exchanged one of those looks, the ones that communicated entire conversations in a single glance. "Claire, sweetheart," my mother began, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. "There's been a change of plans." It turned out that Evan had a championship basketball game that day. Not just any game, but a semi-final that could lead to a state title. The game was 3 hours away. There was no way to do both my party and his game. "We'll celebrate you another time," my father said, already reaching for his car keys. "Evan needs us there. You understand?" I understood perfectly. I understood that my birthday was expendable, that my milestone was less important than my brother's trophy, that "another time" was a phrase that lived in the same category as "someday" and "eventually," which is to say never. That other time never came. My 16th birthday became a footnote, an afterthought eventually forgotten by everyone except me. This was the pattern of my childhood repeated in infinite variations. Evan was easy. Evan was impressive. Evan made my parents proud simply by existing. He had my father's athletic build, my mother's social grace, and a natural charm that opened doors wherever he went. He was the golden child, the fulfillment of every parental dream, the proof that the Whitmore bloodline was destined for greatness. And me. It was difficult. I was quiet. I didn't fit in. I heard these words so often that they became part of my identity labels I wore without questioning. It never occurred to me to ask who decided I was difficult or what exactly I was supposed to fit into. I simply accepted that I was less, and I tried to make myself smaller to compensate. When I was 18, I applied to college. I had worked hard for my grades, studied until my eyes burned, taken every advanced class my school offered. I was accepted into a prestigious university with a partial scholarship, not the full ride Evan would receive for basketball 2 years later, but enough to make it possible. My father looked at the acceptance letter and nodded once. "You'll need to cover the rest yourself," he said. "We're saving for Evan's future." So I did. I took out loans. I worked 2 jobs during the school year and 3 during the summers. I graduated with honors and a mountain of debt, while Evan received a new car as a graduation gift and a position at my father's friend's company, no interview required. On the day I paid off my final loan, I called my mother to share the news. She listened politely, then said, "That's nice, dear. Did you hear that Evan got promoted?" I learned to stop sharing. I learned to celebrate my victories alone. I learned that the Whitmore family had a hierarchy, and I was at the bottom not by accident, but by design. Now, standing in the resort lobby with Michael Grant at my side and my family's certainties crumbling around them, I felt the weight of all those years pressing against my chest, not as pain anymore, but as fuel. "There must be some kind of mistake," my father said, recovering his composure with visible effort. "Claire is traveling with us. She doesn't have any special arrangements." Michael's smile remained professional. "I apologize for any confusion, sir, but Ms. Hale's accommodations were confirmed weeks ago. The presidential suite is ready whenever you are." This last part was directed at me. "What exactly is going on?" Evan demanded, his voice carrying the petulance of someone who had never been denied anything in his life. I let the question hang for a moment, tasting the irony of it. For 32 years I had been asking the same thing. Why am I excluded? Why am I less? What exactly is going on with this family? "I'll explain later," I said, keeping my tone light. Why don't you all check in? I'm sure you're tired from the flight." Michael nodded to one of the staff members, who stepped forward to assist my family with their luggage. It was a subtle gesture, a gentle redirection that moved them away from the center of attention. My father recognized the maneuver and didn't like it, but there was nothing he could do without causing a scene. As they were led toward the main check-in desk, my mother lingered, her eyes searching my face. "Claire, what is this? How do you know him?" "Old friend," I said, which was technically true. I had met Michael 3 years ago during my first visit to the resort as an investor. We had built a professional relationship based on mutual respect and shared vision. He saw what I could bring to this place. I saw what he could make of it. Neither of us needed family connections or inherited status. We had earned our positions through competence and hard work. It was a language my family had never learned to speak. Later that evening, I stood on the balcony of the presidential suite watching the sun sink toward the horizon in shades of gold and crimson. The suite was everything I remembered, expansive and elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the ocean like a living painting. I had stayed here twice before, once during my initial investment tour, and once during a board meeting last year. Both times I was alone. Both times I had wondered what it would feel like to bring my family here, to show them what I had built. Now I know. It felt like vindication and sadness twisted together, impossible to separate. My phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor Brooks, my attorney. "Heard you arrived. Everything is ready at the end. Signal when you want to proceed." I typed back a quick response. "Not yet. Let them settle in first." Eleanor had warned me about this moment. When we first discussed the possibility of revealing my ownership to my family, she had been characteristically blunt. "Once you do this, there's no going back," she said. "They'll never see you the same way. The question is whether that's what you want." I had thought about it for months. Part of me wanted to keep my two worlds separate to protect the life I had built from the contamination of the life I had been born into. But another part, the part that had been dismissed and diminished and told to make herself smaller, that part wanted them to see. Not out of vengeance, not exactly, but out of a need to finally be recognized as who I actually was. My mother called just as the last light faded from the sky. Her voice was carefully modulated, the tone she used when she wanted something without asking directly. "Claire, the family is getting together for dinner at 7 in the main restaurant. You should join us." It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. The word "should" carried the weight of expectation, of obligation, of the same hierarchies that had governed our family for decades. "I'll think about it," I said. "There's nothing to think about. We're your family. This is what families do. This is what families do." The phrase echoed in my mind as I hung up. What families do. They gather around tables and pretend everything is normal. They eat expensive food and drink expensive wine and talk about everything except the truth. I thought about all the tables I had sat at throughout my life, always in the less important seat, always listening more than speaking, always aware that my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. Not tonight. Tonight the table would be different. I dressed carefully, choosing an understated dress that I knew my mother would recognize as designer, a small act of armor for the battle ahead. When I walked into the restaurant, the hostess greeted me by name, not because my family had told her to expect me, but because the staff had been briefed on the owner's arrival. My family was already seated at a prime table near the windows. They looked up as I approached, their expressions a complicated mix of curiosity and discomfort. I took the remaining seat and smiled. "So," I said, "how are you finding the resort?" The dinner was excruciating in the way only family dinners can be, full of long silences and loaded glances and words that meant one thing on the surface and something entirely different underneath. My father ordered wine without consulting the rest of us, as he always did. He made a point of asking the sommelier about the vineyard, displaying knowledge he probably acquired from a quick internet search on the flight over. Evan nodded along, pretending to care about tannins and terroir. I said nothing. I ate my salmon and watched them perform their version of sophistication, the version that required everyone to acknowledge their expertise and defer to their judgment. "This is quite a place," my father said, eventually looking around the restaurant with proprietary satisfaction. "I can see why it's so exclusive. They clearly know how to cater to a certain clientele." The irony wasn't lost on me. The clientele he was so proud to be part of existed because of the systems I had helped build, the standards I had insisted on, the vision I had fought for in countless board meetings. "How did you hear about this resort?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Business contacts," my father replied vaguely. "People who appreciate quality." My mother jumped in. "The Hendersons stayed here last year and couldn't stop raving about it. They said it was absolutely transformative." Transformative. I wondered what exactly had been transformed. Their waistlines after too many all-inclusive meals, their sense of superiority after a week of being waited on. "And you, Claire?" Evan asked, his tone carrying a hint of challenge. "How did you know about this place?" I took a sip of water, considering my answer. "Investment research," I said finally. "I like to keep track of high-performing properties in the hospitality sector." It was the truth stripped of context. My father raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you do investment research?" "Since I started my career," I said. "Nearly 10 years now." He waved his hand dismissively. "Write your little consulting thing." The conversation moved on to other topics: the planned activities for the week, the spa treatments my mother had already booked, the golf course Evan was eager to try. I listened and nodded at appropriate intervals, playing the role they expected me to play. After dinner, I excused myself and returned to my suite. Michael had left a bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket along with a note. "Looking forward to our meeting tomorrow. Everything is prepared. M." I poured myself a glass and sat by the window watching the moonlight dance on the water. Tomorrow the preparations will begin in earnest. Tonight, I will rest. The next morning I woke before dawn. Old habit. When you spend years building something from nothing, you learn that the early hours are the most productive, the quietest, the most honest. The world hasn't yet cluttered itself with noise, and you can think clearly about what matters. I dressed in workout clothes and took a long walk along the beach, feeling the sand shift beneath my feet, watching the sky transition from black to gray to pink. The resort was just waking up around me, staff members moving with quiet efficiency to prepare for another day of perfect service. I recognized several faces from previous visits. The groundskeeper who took such pride in the tropical gardens. The chef who had once cooked me a private breakfast and discussed his philosophy of food. The maintenance manager who could fix anything with a calm competence that I envied. These were the people who made this place what it was. Not the guests with their designer clothes and assumed importance, the workers. When I returned to the main building, I found my family emerging from their rooms looking rumpled and slightly disoriented. Resort mornings were different from home mornings. The tropical light was softer, the air heavier, the pace deliberately slower. My father spotted me in my exercise clothes and frowned. "You've been up for a while." "I like mornings," I said. "You always were strange that way." Strange. Another label, another way of marking me as different, as other, as not quite right. I had stopped fighting these characterizations years ago. Now they simply slid past me, meaningless noise from a man who had never bothered to understand me. "I have some meetings this morning," I said, "but I'll see you all at dinner." "Meetings?" My mother's voice sharpened. "What kind of meetings? We're on vacation, Claire." "Work never really stops," I said. "But don't worry, I won't let it interfere with family time." The phrase family time tasted sour in my mouth. What family time had we ever had that wasn't structured around my father's preferences, my mother's social obligations, my brother's achievements? When has anyone ever scheduled time around my needs? But that was the past. This week will be different. I met Eleanor Brooks in a private conference room adjacent to the management offices. She had arrived the previous evening, staying in one of the quieter bungalows away from the main resort. Eleanor preferred discretion. It was one of the things I valued most about her. "How was dinner?" she asked, arranging her documents on the table. "Predictable," I said. "They're still processing. My father is pretending nothing happened. My mother is confused, and Evan is sulking." Classic denial response. Eleanor smiled grimly. "They'll move through the stages quickly once we proceed." "Do you think I'm being vindictive?" She looked up from her papers, her expression thoughtful. I think you're being honest. There's a difference. Vindictive would be destroying them for the pleasure of watching them suffer. What you're doing is simply removing the masks. If they suffer from seeing the truth, that's not your fault. That's the consequence of building their identity on false assumptions. I nodded, grateful for her clarity. Eleanor had been my attorney for 5 years, ever since I made my first significant investment. She had seen me grow from a hesitant newcomer to a confident businesswoman. She knew my history with my family. She understood what this week meant. "Let's review the timeline," she said. We spent the next 2 hours going over every detail. The documents that needed to be signed, the announcements that would be made, the boundaries that would be established. By the time we finished, the sun was high in the sky, and my family was probably wondering where I was. I found them at the pool, arranged on lounge chairs, like a magazine advertisement for wealthy leisure. My mother was reading a novel. My father was reviewing something on his phone. Evan was chatting up a young woman in a bikini who seemed politely uninterested. "There you are," my mother said when she saw me. "We were starting to worry." "No need to worry," I said. "Just had some things to take care of." "What kind of things?" "Administrative details. Nothing exciting." My father looked up from his phone. "Claire, I've been meaning to ask, how exactly did you afford to stay here? This place isn't cheap." The question was delivered with casual condescension, as if he were asking a child how they had managed to reach the cookie jar. He expected me to explain, to justify, to prove my worthiness. "I have savings," I said. "Savings from what, your consulting work?" He said the word consulting the way someone might say pretending. "Among other things." "You've always been secretive," my mother chimed in. "Even as a child. I could never figure out what was going on in that head of yours." "No, you couldn't," I thought. "Because you never tried. You were too busy figuring out Evan, managing his schedule, celebrating his victories, cleaning up his messes. I was an afterthought. A second child who didn't quite match the first, a puzzle you couldn't be bothered to solve." "I value my privacy," I said out loud. "That's all." Evan abandoned his failed flirtation and wandered over. "Guys, let it go. Claire's always been weird about money. Remember when she wouldn't tell us what she made at her first job?" I remembered. I had just started my career, earning a decent salary for a 23-year-old. When my family asked, I had deflected. Not because I was ashamed of the number, but because I knew what would happen. My father would compare it unfavorably to Evan's starting salary. My mother would suggest ways I could spend it more wisely. The conversation would become another opportunity to remind me that I was less than behind struggling, so I had kept it private. And they had interpreted my privacy as shame. "Some things are personal," I said. "In this family," my father laughed humorlessly, "there are no secrets in this family. We share everything." I thought about all the things I knew that they didn't. My investments, my career, my ownership of the very ground they were currently lounging on. These weren't secrets born of shame. They were protections walls I had built to keep their judgment from poisoning the life I had created. "Of course," I said, "we share everything." My phone buzzed. A message from Michael. "Small matter needs your attention. Private office whenever convenient." I excused myself again, leaving my family to their sunbathing and speculation. As I walked toward the management building, I felt their eyes on my back, heavy with curiosity and suspicion. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. By the end of this week, they would have all the answers they never thought to ask for. The small matter Michael mentioned turned out to be a staffing decision that needed my approval. One of the senior managers wanted to promote someone from housekeeping to a supervisory role, and resort policy required ownership sign-off for all management appointments. I reviewed the employee's file. Excellent performance reviews consistently, positive guest feedback, natural leadership qualities recognized by colleagues, the kind of person who made organizations run smoothly without seeking credit or attention. I signed the approval without hesitation. "The family situation," Michael said carefully, "is becoming something of a discussion point among the staff." I expected as much. "Some of them remember you from previous visits. They're confused about why you haven't corrected your family's behavior." "What behavior specifically?" Michael shifted slightly. "Your father attempted to negotiate a room upgrade yesterday. He implied that he had connections to the ownership. He was quite insistent. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of embarrassment that came with being Richard Whitmore's daughter. He had always been like this, using proximity to power as a substitute for actual power name-dropping and implying and maneuvering to get what he believed he deserved. How did the staff handle it? Professionally. They explained that all room assignments were finalized and that any changes would need to come through the management office. Good. He was not pleased. I'm sure he wasn't. We discussed a few other matters, then Michael hesitated at the door. Ms. Hale, if I may offer an observation. Of course. Your family seems to believe they understand their position here. They treat the staff with a certain condescension that suggests they think themselves important guests. If they knew the truth. They'll know soon enough, I said. But not yet. I need them to show me who they really are when they think no one who matters is watching. Michael nodded slowly, understanding. I'll ensure the staff remains professional regardless of their behavior. Thank you, Michael. And please make sure the woman who was just promoted knows how valued she is. People like her are why this place succeeds. He smiled. I'll pass along the message. That afternoon, I joined my family for lunch at the beachfront restaurant. It was the kind of meal that should have been pleasant, fresh seafood, tropical drinks, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of flowers. Instead, it became a masterclass in passive aggression. Claire, sit up straight, my mother murmured as I settled into my chair. People are watching. I glanced around. The other diners were absorbed in their own conversations, their own meals, their own lives. No one was paying attention to the Whitmore family's posture. I'm fine, I said. You always slump. It's not attractive. Not attractive. Another judgment, another standard I had failed to meet. In my mother's world, women existed to be looked at, to present themselves pleasingly, to conform to expectations that had been old-fashioned 30 years ago and were practically prehistoric now. I had long since stopped trying to change her mind. Some battles weren't worth fighting. You simply had to build a life where those judgments couldn't reach you. Evan was scrolling through his phone, pausing occasionally to show our father something on the screen. They huddled together, excluding my mother and me from their conversation, speaking in low voices, punctuated by chuckles. What's so funny? My mother asked. Nothing, Evan said. Just a meme. Memes. My mother's voice dripped with disdain. When I was your age, we had actual conversations. You still have actual conversations, Evan pointed out. You just don't like any of them. It was a rare moment of honesty from my brother, and it surprised me. Evan rarely challenged our parents, preferring to stay in their good graces and reap the benefits, but perhaps even he had limits. My father cleared his throat, redirecting attention to himself. I've been thinking about our plans for the week. The resort offers several exclusive experiences that might be worth exploring. Like what? I asked. Private yacht excursions, helicopter tours, that sort of thing. Those do sound interesting, my mother agreed. Very sophisticated. I wondered if they realized how transparent they were. Every choice, every preference, every aspiration was filtered through the lens of how it would appear to others. Yacht excursions weren't desirable because they were enjoyable. They were desirable because they signaled status, because they could be photographed and posted, because they proved that the Whitmore family belonged among the elite. We should do the yacht, Evan said. I could get some great content. Content. That was Evan's current obsession, building a social media presence that would somehow translate into career opportunities. He had spent the last 2 years documenting his lifestyle, which was funded primarily by our parents, and presenting it as evidence of his success. What about you, Claire? My father asked. Any interest in joining us? The question caught me off guard. It was the first time all day that anyone had directly included me in their plans. I might, I said cautiously, depending on my schedule. Your schedule. My father's voice carried an edge. You're on vacation, Claire. What schedule could you possibly have? I told you I have some work matters to attend to. Work matters. He exchanged glances with my mother. That's very dedicated to you. The word dedicated was not a compliment. In my father's vocabulary, dedicated meant obsessive, meant antisocial, meant prioritizing the wrong things. Real success came easily to people like Evan, who could charm their way through life without breaking a sweat. Dedication was for people who lacked natural talent. I take my responsibilities seriously, I said. Too seriously, perhaps. My mother reached over to pat my hand. You need to learn to relax, Claire. Enjoy life. You'll never find a husband if you're always buried in work. And there it was, the ultimate measure of female success in my mother's worldview. Not career achievements, not financial independence, not personal fulfillment. Marriage, a husband, someone to take care of me because obviously I couldn't take care of myself. I'm not looking for a husband, I said. That's what worries us, my father muttered. The meal continued, but my appetite had vanished. I picked at my food while my family discussed their plans, occasionally mentioning my name as an afterthought, occasionally remembering to include me in their arrangements. After lunch, I retreated to my suite and called Eleanor. They're exactly who I thought they were, I said. Disappointing. Not surprising, just clarifying. Sometimes that's valuable too. We reviewed the schedule for the next few days. There would be a board meeting tomorrow, a formal gathering of resort investors that had been planned months ago. I would attend, of course. My family would not be invited. They'll notice your absence, Eleanor said. I know. And they'll ask questions. I know that too. Are you ready for what comes after? I thought about all the years of dismissal, all the birthday parties that didn't happen, all the achievements that went unnoticed, all the times I had been told that my presence would lower someone's status, that I didn't fit in, that I was somehow less than my brother in every way that mattered. I've been ready for years, I said. I just didn't know it until now. That evening, my family knocked on my door and invited me to join them for cocktails on the terrace. It was a gesture toward normalcy, toward the kind of family togetherness that existed in photographs and holiday cards, but rarely in actual life. I accepted because I was curious. What would they say if given the opportunity? What would they reveal about themselves when they thought they were among equals? The terrace was beautiful, overlooking the ocean, as the sun began its descent. We arranged ourselves in plush chairs around a low table, and my father ordered drinks for the group without asking what anyone wanted. To family, he said, raising his glass. We echoed the toast and drank. The alcohol was smooth and expensive, the kind of quality my father would have dismissed as pretentious if he had known I could afford it. You know, my mother said this is nice, the four of us together. We should do this more often. Well, we should, I agreed, wondering if she would remember this sentiment the next time she decided to exclude me from a family gathering. When we get back, my father said, we should plan something else, maybe a ski trip. Evan's been wanting to try that new resort in Colorado. That sounds fun, Evan said. You and Claire. I looked at my brother, trying to read his expression. Was this a genuine invitation, or was it another setup for disappointment? Would they change their minds at the last minute, decide that my presence would somehow diminish their experience, find another reason to leave me behind? We'll see, I said. My father's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen. His expression shifted subtly, a flicker of something I couldn't quite identify. Everything okay? My mother asked. Fine, he said. Just a work thing. But I noticed that he put the phone face down on the table, that he didn't meet anyone's eyes for several seconds afterward. Something had unsettled him. I wondered what. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. My family continued their conversation, planning activities, discussing restaurants, and debating whether to book spa treatments. They included me more than usual, as if the unfamiliar environment had briefly reset our dynamics. I let myself enjoy the moment, knowing it wouldn't last. Tomorrow the board meeting will happen. Questions would be asked, truths would begin to emerge, and my family would finally have to reckon with the daughter they had underestimated for so long. The morning of the board meeting, I woke early and dressed with particular care. Navy dress, modest heels, simple jewelry, the uniform of a professional woman who knew her worth without needing to advertise it. My family was at breakfast when I passed through the lobby. They waved me over, but I held up my phone apologetically. Meeting, I mouthed. My father's brow furrowed. Another meeting. Another unexplained absence. The pieces were beginning to accumulate, and he didn't have enough information to assemble the puzzle. Good. The board meeting was held in a private room with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the ocean. Around the table sat 7 people, each representing significant investments in the resort's future. I knew them all. We had built something together over the past 3 years, transforming a struggling property into a world-class destination. Michael Grant presented the quarterly reports. Revenue was up. Occupancy was at record highs. Guest satisfaction scores exceeded every benchmark. The expansion plans we had discussed were progressing on schedule. I asked questions, offered observations, and approved several proposals. This was the work I loved, the tangible evidence of ideas becoming reality. Every decision we made affected real people, real jobs, real experiences. It mattered in ways that my father's status-seeking never could. After the meeting, one of the other board members pulled me aside. Victor Ramirez was a semi-retired hospitality executive who had become something of a mentor to me. "Your family doesn't know, do they?" "Not yet." He shook his head, smiling. "When I first met you, I wondered how someone with your background developed such a drive. Now that I've seen them at the resort, I understand." "What do you mean?" "Sometimes the greatest motivation comes from being underestimated." He patted my shoulder. "You've built something remarkable, Claire. Don't let anyone make you feel small for it." I returned to the main resort area feeling lighter than I had in days. The conversation with Victor reminded me why I had worked so hard, why I had kept my success private, why this week was necessary. I wasn't seeking revenge in the traditional sense. I was seeking recognition, acknowledgement, the simple dignity of being seen for who I actually was. My family had claimed a prime location at the pool, commandeering chairs and commanding the staff's attention with the imperiousness of a queen. I watched from a distance as my father complained about the temperature of his drink, as my mother rearranged cushions to better catch the light for photographs, as Evan scrolled through his phone with aggressive disinterest. These were the people who had told me I would lower their status. These were the judges who had found me wanting. I thought about all the times I had accepted their verdicts, internalized their criticisms, and believed their assessments of my worth. It seemed impossible now, like remembering a dream that had felt real at the time, but revealed its absurdity in the light of day. That afternoon, my family decided to explore the resort's grounds. I joined them, curious to see how they would interact with the space I had helped create. We walked through the tropical gardens, past the infinity pools, along the winding paths that connected the various amenities. My father commented constantly, comparing everything to other resorts he had visited, usually unfavorably. "The landscaping is nice, but have you seen the gardens at that place in the Maldives? Much more impressive." "These pools are decent, but they don't compare to the facilities in Dubai." "The architecture is interesting, but it lacks the grandeur of the European properties." I listened without responding. His criticisms weren't really about the resort. They were about maintaining his position as the expert, the arbiter, the man who had seen everything and could judge accordingly. If he admitted that this place was exceptional, he would have to admit that his initial assessment of me had been wrong. That was unacceptable. We stopped at the spa to review the treatment menu. My mother was particularly interested, examining the options with the intensity of someone planning a military campaign. "I want the full experience," she announced. "The deluxe package with the private treatment room." The spa receptionist smiled politely. "That's a lovely choice, ma'am. We do have limited availability for the private rooms, but I can check our schedule." "Please do. And make sure the therapist is experienced. I have very specific standards." Specific standards. Code for difficult and demanding. I watched the receptionist's smile become slightly fixed, and I felt a surge of sympathy for the staff who would have to manage my mother's expectations. "Actually," I said, stepping forward, "I might be able to help with the scheduling." The receptionist looked at me, and I saw recognition flicker in her eyes. She had been at the resort long enough to know who I was. "Of course, Miss Hale, whatever you need." My mother's head turned sharply. "Ms. Hale. Why did she call you that?" "That's my name," I said mildly. "She used it differently, more formally." "Did she?" My mother studied me with new suspicion. Claire, what's going on? You've been acting strange ever since we got here. Meetings, disappearances, now this. What aren't you telling us? Before I could answer, Michael Grant appeared at the spa entrance. He was looking for me, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes conveying urgency. Ms. Hale, there's a matter that requires your attention. Of course, Michael. I'll be right there. Ms. Hale again, Evan observed, and the general manager personally came to find you. What exactly do you do at your consulting job, Claire? I smiled, feeling the moment crystallize around me. We should talk tonight, all of us. There are some things I should have told you a long time ago. I left them in the spa, their questions hanging unanswered in the perfumed air. The matter Michael needed to discuss was genuine an issue with a supplier that required immediate authorization, but it also served as a convenient exit from my family's growing suspicions. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the management offices handling the supplier issue and reviewing upcoming events. There was a Christmas gala scheduled for the following evening, a major event that brought together resort guests, local dignitaries, and industry leaders. Will you be attending? Michael asked. I will, and I'd like to make some remarks if that's appropriate. He smiled. I'll add you to the program. That evening, I knocked on my parents' suite door. My father answered, his expression guarded but curious. You said you wanted to talk, he said. I do. They gathered in the living area of their suite, which was elegant but noticeably smaller than mine. I sat across from them, feeling the weight of the conversation ahead. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting, I said. Can you do that? My mother nodded quickly. My father hesitated, then inclined his head slightly. 3 years ago, I made an investment in this resort, I began. At the time, it was struggling. The previous management had made some bad decisions, and the property was at risk of closing. An investment, my father interrupted despite his promise. With what money? With money I earned and saved and grew through other investments. I held up my hand before he could speak again. I asked you not to interrupt. He fell silent, though his jaw was tight. My investment was significant enough to give me a controlling stake in the property. Over the past 3 years, I've worked with the management team to turn things around. The success you see here, the reputation, the exclusivity, I helped build that. The silence stretched. My mother's face had gone pale. Evan looked like someone had explained gravity to him for the first time, and he was still processing. You own this resort, my father said finally. I own a controlling stake, yes. That's impossible. And yet, here we are. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. Why didn't you tell us? Why let us make fools of ourselves? I didn't let you do anything. You made your own choices. We wouldn't have acted that way if we had known. That's exactly the point. My mother spoke up, her voice trembling. What point? What are you trying to prove? I took a deep breath. All my life you've told me I wasn't good enough, not impressive enough, not successful enough. You excluded me from family events because my presence would lower your status. You compared me to Evan and found me wanting. You dismissed my career as a little consulting thing. You made me feel like a failure. We never, my mother started. You did, I said firmly. Maybe not intentionally, but consistently. And I accepted it for a long time because I didn't know any better. But now I do. And I wanted you to see me clearly, without the lens of your assumptions. My father turned from the window. So this was what, some kind of revenge? No, this was the truth. The revenge, if you want to call it that, is simply being successful, despite your predictions. The room fell silent again. I could see them struggling to reconcile the daughter they had dismissed with the woman who owned the ground beneath their feet. There's a gala tomorrow night, I said, standing. I'll be speaking as one of the resort's owners. You're welcome to attend as my guests. I walked to the door and paused, looking back at them. I hope you'll come. I hope we can start fresh from here, but that's your choice to make. That was when I realized they still thought they were in control. The morning after my revelation, the resort felt different. Not physically, of course. The gardens were still immaculate, the ocean still impossibly blue, the staff still impeccably professional. But the air between my family and me had shifted fundamentally. I had breakfast alone on my balcony, watching the early sunlight paint patterns on the water. Eleanor called to check in. How did it go? About how you expected. Denial, then anger, then silence. Did you sleep? Better than I have in weeks, actually. It was true. For years I had carried the weight of my family's judgment like a stone in my chest. Last night I had finally set it down. Whatever happened next, I had spoken my truth. Around mid-morning there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my mother standing in the hallway looking smaller than I remembered. "May I come in?" I stepped aside to let her enter. She moved through the suite, taking in the expansive space, the ocean view, the evidence of my success that surrounded her. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "Thank you." She turned to face me. "I didn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about what you said, about how we made you feel." I waited, not sure where this was going. I told myself I was a good mother, that I treated you and Evan the same, but when I really thought about it, I really remembered. She trailed off. Her eyes were glistening, fixed on me. "Your 16th birthday. I had forgotten about that until you mentioned the patterns last night. We chose Evan's game. We always chose Evan." "Yes," I said simply. "You did." "I'm sorry, Claire." The words seemed to cost her something. "I'm sorry for every time we made you feel less than. I'm sorry for every opportunity we gave him and denied you. I'm sorry I didn't see how extraordinary you were becoming while I was so focused on him." I had imagined this moment many times over the years. In my imagination I had felt triumphant, vindicated, righteous. But standing here with my mother's tears and her halting apology, I felt something else entirely. Something like grief for all the years we had lost. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "Can you forgive me? I can try. But forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to how it was. I'm not the person you thought I was. I never was." She nodded slowly. "I'm starting to understand that." We talked for another hour more honestly than we ever had before. She asked about my business, my life, my dreams. Real questions, not the superficial inquiries she usually offered. I answered carefully, still testing the boundaries of this new dynamic. When she left, I felt drained but somehow cleansed. One conversation wouldn't undo decades of dysfunction, but it was a beginning. My father did not come to apologize. Instead, I heard from Michael that he had spent the morning at the golf course playing alone, refusing all offers of company or assistance. Processing, perhaps, or avoiding. Evan appeared at lunch, sliding into the seat across from me with an expression I couldn't read. "So you're rich," he said. "I'm financially secure." "Rich enough to own this place." "Rich enough to own part of this place. There are other investors." He looked around the restaurant at the elegant surroundings, the attentive staff, the beautiful people enjoying their beautiful meals. "I always thought I was the successful one," he said. "Dad always said I was the one who had it together. You were the one who struggled." "Dad was wrong." "Yeah." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm starting to get that." "It's not a competition, Evan, isn't it? It's always been a competition, since we were kids, and I always won." He paused. "Except I didn't, did I? I won the version Dad created. You won the real one." It was the most self-aware thing I had ever heard my brother say. For a moment, I glimpsed the person he might have been if our parents had treated us equally, if he hadn't been raised to believe that his position was guaranteed by birth rather than earned through effort. "You could still win the real one," I said. "You're not dead yet." He snorted. "That's harsh." "That's honest. You have resources, connections, intelligence. You could build something meaningful if you chose to. The question is whether you want to. And if I don't, then you'll keep living the life you're living. It's not my decision to make." He studied me for a long moment. "You're different than I thought. I'm the same person I've always been. You just never looked closely enough to see it." He left without ordering, and I ate my lunch alone thinking about the conversation. Evan had never been cruel to me, not intentionally. He had simply accepted the role our parents assigned him and played it well. Now that role was being questioned, and he didn't know who he was without it. The afternoon passed quietly. I reviewed final preparations for the gala with Michael, approved some minor decisions, and took a long walk along the beach. The sun was fierce, but the ocean breeze tempered its intensity, and I found myself relaxing in a way I rarely could. As evening approached, I returned to my suite to prepare. The dress I had brought for the gala was one of my favorites, a deep burgundy that highlighted my coloring without being ostentatious. Professional but memorable, confident without being aggressive. When I arrived at the ballroom, it was already filled with guests. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the space. A string quartet played in one corner. Waitstaff circulated with champagne and canapes. Michael materialized at my elbow. "Ms. Hale, your family arrived a few minutes ago. They're near the windows." I looked in the direction he indicated. My parents and Evan stood in a small cluster, looking distinctly uncomfortable among the confident, moneyed crowd. My father was clutching his drink too tightly. My mother kept adjusting her dress. Evan's smile was fixed and unconvincing. "Thank you, Michael." I made my way through the room, stopping to greet other investors and guests along the way. By the time I reached my family, I had been seen and acknowledged by half the room's most influential attendees. "You came," I said. My mother nodded. "You asked us to." "I'm glad." My father said nothing, but his eyes followed me with an intensity that suggested he was still processing, still recalibrating, still trying to fit this new reality into his worldview. The evening progressed, conversations, connections, the delicate choreography of social interaction at the highest levels. My family stayed close, watching, listening, learning a world they had always aspired to, but never truly understood. When Michael announced that one of the resort's owners would be speaking, I felt every eye in the room shift toward me. I made my way to the small stage at the front of the ballroom. "Good evening," I began. "For those who don't know me, my name is Claire Hale. I'm one of the fortunate people who gets to call this beautiful place a second home." I spoke about the resort's mission, its commitment to excellence, and its plans for the future. I thanked the staff, the management team, and the other investors. I talked about what it meant to build something meaningful, to create experiences that would become memories. Throughout my speech, I could see my family in the crowd. My mother's eyes were glistening, fixed on me. My father's expression had shifted from resistance to something that might have been pride. Evan looked thoughtful, perhaps seeing his sister clearly for the first time. "Finally," I said, "I want to thank my family for joining us tonight. They've taught me many things over the years, not all of them intentional, but all of them valuable. Sometimes the greatest lessons come from unexpected places." I stepped down from the stage to applause. Michael was beaming. Eleanor, who had slipped into the back of the room, gave me a subtle nod of approval. And my father, Richard Whitmore, who had once told me that my presence would lower his status, walked across the room in front of everyone and extended his hand. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly. "I've been wrong for a very long time." I took his hand. "Yes, you have. Can we start over?" "We can try." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, maybe not ever in the complete sense. But it was an acknowledgement, recognition, a first step on a very long road. The morning after the gala, everything was different. I woke late, which was unusual for me. The emotional intensity of the previous days had taken its toll, and my body demanded rest. By the time I emerged from my suite, the resort was already humming with activity. My family was waiting in the lobby, not at breakfast, not pursuing their own activities, but standing in the common area like guests awaiting instructions. The sight stopped me in my tracks. "Good morning," I said cautiously. "We weren't sure what the plan was today," my mother explained. "We thought we should wait for you." Wait for me. 3 words I had never expected to hear from this family. My father had always set the agenda, determined the schedule, made the decisions. Now they were looking at me. "I have some business to attend to this morning," I said, "but we could have lunch together if you're available." They nodded in unison, an almost comical display of compliance. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that they didn't know how to behave. I met with Michael and the management team to review gala feedback and discuss the coming week's schedule. The conversation was routine but necessary. the kind of detailed work that separated successful enterprises from struggling ones. Attention to detail, commitment to excellence, respect for every role in the organization. When I emerged from the meeting, I found my father waiting outside the conference room. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. We walked together through the gardens past the flowering hibiscus and the carefully pruned palms. The ocean glittered in the distance, impossibly blue. "I've been thinking about what happened," he said, "about why I treated you the way I did." I waited, giving him space to continue. "When you were born, I expected you to be like Evan. Easy, charming, social. When you weren't, I didn't know what to do with you. You were so serious, so independent. You didn't need us the way he did." "Everyone needs their family," I said. "I just learned not to show it." He nodded slowly. "I failed you. As a father, as a person. I told myself I was protecting you by pushing you to be better, but that was a lie. I was pushing you away because you made me uncomfortable. Why? Because you saw through things. You always did. Evan accepted whatever I told him. You questioned, and I couldn't handle being questioned." It was more honesty than I had ever gotten from my father. Part of me wanted to embrace it, to tell him all was forgiven, to pretend the past didn't matter. But it did matter. Decades of dismissal couldn't be erased by one difficult conversation. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "But words are easy. Behavior is harder." "I know. I'm going to try to do better." "Then show me. Not now, but over time. Consistency matters more than grand gestures." He looked at me with something like respect. "You're tougher than I ever gave you credit for." I had to be. We walked back toward the main building in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than we had shared before, less hostile, more thoughtful, the beginning of something that might eventually become understanding. At lunch, my family was subdued but present. They asked questions about the resort, about my work, about how I had built what I had built. Real questions delivered with genuine curiosity rather than skepticism or dismissal. I answered some of them and deflected others. Not everything needed to be shared immediately. Trust had to be rebuilt, gradually tested and verified before it could be fully extended. After lunch, Michael approached with a request. "We have several guests arriving this afternoon who specifically asked if you would be available to greet them. Long-term clients who have been with us since the early days." Of course. Where and when? He provided the details, and I spent the afternoon meeting people who had believed in the resort when its future was uncertain. Old friends in the business world, colleagues who had taken a chance on my vision, investors who had trusted my judgment. My family observed from a distance, watching me navigate these relationships with ease. I could feel their surprise, their reassessment. The woman they had dismissed as unsuccessful was welcomed and respected by people whose opinions actually mattered in this world. That evening, I arranged for the family to dine in one of the resort's private venues, a small restaurant reserved for special occasions. The chef prepared a custom menu, and the sommelier selected wines that complemented each course perfectly. It was the kind of experience my father would have killed to arrange for himself. Instead, it was arranged for him by the daughter he had judged unworthy. "This is incredible," my mother said as the third course arrived. "I've never had anything like this." "The chef has been with us for 2 years," I said. "I recruited him from a 3-star restaurant in San Francisco. He wanted creative freedom, and we could offer that." "You recruited him personally?" "I'm involved in all major staffing decisions. The people make the place." My father was quiet throughout the meal, but I noticed him watching me with an attention he had never shown before. He was studying me, trying to understand who I had become, while he wasn't paying attention. After dinner, Evan asked if he could speak with me privately. We walked down to the beach, shoes in hand, the sand cool beneath our feet. "I'm going to make some changes," he said. "When we get back home, I'm going to actually try to build something instead of just coasting on Dad's connections." "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet, but watching you these past few days, seeing what you've accomplished, I realized I've been wasting my potential. Settling for easy, when I could have been reaching for something meaningful." "That's a good realization. I'm also going to apologize to you, properly. For all the times I let Dad treat you badly without saying anything. For all the times I benefited from his favoritism without questioning it. I was complicit in how they diminished you, and I'm sorry." I stopped walking and turned to face him. In the moonlight, he looked younger than his years, stripped of the confidence that had always seemed so effortless. "I accept your apology," I said, "and I hope you follow through on the changes. Not for my sake, but for yours. You could do something real with your life if you chose to. Will you help me? I'll support you, but you have to do the work yourself. That's the only way it means anything." We walked back in companionable silence, two siblings tentatively rebuilding a relationship that had never quite worked, but might still have potential. The next morning brought a shift I hadn't anticipated. Word of my ownership had spread through the resort, not from my family, but from the gala and the social networks that connected wealthy travelers. Suddenly, I wasn't just another guest, or even just an owner. I was a story. I noticed it first at breakfast. Other guests approached my table to introduce themselves, to compliment the resort, to hint at business opportunities. Some were genuine, others transparently motivated by self-interest. I had learned to distinguish between them years ago. What I hadn't expected was the impact on my family. My father walked into the restaurant expecting his usual treatment deference from staff, respect from other guests, the invisible acknowledgement of his status. Instead, he was barely noticed. The attention that would normally flow toward the patriarch of any gathering flowed instead toward me. He handled it with visible discomfort, ordering his breakfast with unnecessary curtness, complaining about minor details that would have escaped his notice days earlier. The staff remained professional, but I could see them exchanging glances. They knew who signed the checks. My mother tried to adapt. She positioned herself near me, attached herself to my conversations, introduced herself as my mother, with an emphasis that suggested she was claiming reflected glory. I allowed it because the alternative was conflict, and I was tired of conflict. Evan mostly stayed silent, observing, rather than participating. Something had shifted in him since our conversation on the beach. He was thinking instead of reacting, watching instead of performing. I didn't know if it would last, but it was an improvement. The social dynamics became clearer as the day progressed. When we walked through the resort, other guests greeted me first. When we sat at the pool, the best chairs were offered to our group because I was in it. When we went to dinner, the maitre d' personally escorted us to the premier table. And throughout it all, my father grew smaller. Not physically, but in presence. The man who had dominated every room he entered was diminishing in direct proportion to my visibility. The attention he had always claimed was being redirected, and there was nothing he could do about it. That evening, there was a cocktail reception for resort members and VIP guests. It was the kind of event my father would normally have relished, an opportunity to network, to name-drop, to position himself among people who considered important. Instead, he found himself standing alone for long stretches, while other guests clustered around me. The conversations that might have included him flowed in other directions. The connections he would have pursued were forming without him. At one point, I noticed him standing by the windows, drink in hand, watching the room with an expression I had never seen before. He looked lost, uncertain, small. Part of me felt satisfaction. This was karma after all. The man who had told me my presence would lower his status was now experiencing true social diminishment for the first time in his life. But another part of me felt something closer to pity. My father's entire identity was built on being the center of attention, the decision-maker, the patriarch. Without that role, he didn't know who he was. I excused myself from my current conversation and walked over to him. "Not your usual kind of event?" I asked. He smiled ruefully. "I used to think I was good at this, working a room, making connections. Turns out I was just good at finding people who wanted something from me." That's a hard realization. It's an honest one. He took a sip of his drink. "I've been watching you tonight. You're genuinely good at this. Not performing, not manipulating, actually connecting with people. It took practice, and some painful lessons. From me, some of them." He nodded slowly. "I'm starting to understand that everything I thought I knew about success was wrong. I measured it in the wrong things. Status image, other people's opinions. You measure it in what impact meaning. Something like that. It's about building things that matter, helping people who deserve it, leaving something better than you found it. I haven't done any of that, he said quietly. I've spent my whole life climbing a ladder that doesn't lead anywhere. It's not too late to change direction. Isn't it? I'm 63 years old, Claire. How do you change direction at 63? One decision at a time, same as any other age. We stood together in silence for a moment, watching the room. Other guests continued to network, to laugh, to enjoy the evening. Life went on around us, indifferent to our private reckoning. "Will you teach me?" he asked finally. "Teach you what? How to build something meaningful, how to matter for the right reasons." It was perhaps the most vulnerable thing my father had ever said to me. The man who had positioned himself as the expert in everything was asking his dismissed daughter to teach him. "I can share what I've learned," I said carefully. "But you have to be willing to actually change, not just talk about it, not just intend to, actually do the work." "I understand." "And you have to start with Mom and Evan, with our family. You have to repair what's been broken there before you can build anything else." He looked at me with something like hope. "Can that be repaired?" "I don't know, but it has to be attempted." He finished his drink and set the glass down with deliberate care. "Okay, I'll try. I'll really try." "Good. Then we can talk more. But not tonight. Tonight, just be present. Watch, listen, learn." I returned to the other guests, leaving my father by the window. But throughout the rest of the evening, I noticed him doing exactly what I had suggested. Watching, listening, learning. It was a small thing, but it was a beginning. The week was drawing to a close, and with it the temporary world we had created at the resort. In 2 days, my family would fly home. The question of what happened next hung over everything like a cloud waiting to burst. Eleanor had scheduled a final meeting to discuss the legal and practical implications of my family knowing about my ownership. There were documents to review, decisions to make, boundaries to establish. "The key question," she said, "is what role, if any, you want them to play moving forward." "What do you mean?" "Now that they know they may expect to benefit. Jobs, investments, preferential treatment. You need to decide where the lines are before they start asking." It was a practical concern, one I hadn't fully considered. My family had always operated on the assumption that connection equaled entitlement. If my father had owned a resort, I would have been expected to accept whatever scraps he chose to throw my way and be grateful for them. But I wasn't my father. "I'll be clear about boundaries," I said. "Family relationships are one thing, business is another. They don't automatically overlap. And if they push back, then they'll learn that pushing back doesn't work with me." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "That's the right approach. Just be prepared for some resistance. Old habits die hard, especially in families." After the meeting, I found my mother waiting outside. She had the look of someone who had been rehearsing a conversation and wasn't sure she was ready for it. "Can we talk?" she asked. We walked to a quiet corner of the lobby and sat in chairs overlooking the garden. "I want to understand," she said. "All these years you were building this, and we had no idea. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me? She stopped, considering. "Probably not. I would have thought you were exaggerating or dreaming." "Exactly. And then you would have told Dad, and he would have found ways to diminish it, to compare it to something Evan had done, to remind me that real success looked different." "Were we that predictable? You were that consistent." She was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about how different things might have been. If we had supported you instead of dismissing you. If we had seen what you were capable of." "We can't change the past," I said. "We can only decide what happens next." "What do you want to happen next?" It was a good question. I had spent so long building my success in isolation, protecting it from my family's judgment, that I hadn't really considered what it would look like to share it with them. "I want an honest relationship," I said finally. "No more pretending, no more performing. I want to be seen for who I actually am, not who you expected me to be. And if we can do that, then we'll have something worth keeping." but it has to be real. The old dynamics, the favoritism, the dismissals, that all has to end. I won't go back to being the family afterthought. She reached over and took my hand. I don't want that either. These past few days have shown me what I was missing, what we were all missing. Then let's try, but slowly. Trust takes time to rebuild. That afternoon, I had a similar conversation with Evan. He was more direct, less emotional. I want in, he said. In whatever you're building, I want to be part of it. Not as a favor, but as a contributor. I want to earn my place. That's a significant shift from your previous approach to work. I know, and I know you probably don't believe me. But watching you this week, seeing what you've accomplished, it made me realize how empty my life has been. I've been coasting on Dad's reputation, accepting positions I didn't deserve, pretending that was success. It's not. What would you want to do? I don't know yet. Learn the business probably. Start from the bottom and work up. See if I can actually build something instead of just inheriting it. I studied my brother, looking for signs of the old Evan, the one who would have said anything to get what he wanted. But I saw something different. Something that might have been genuine ambition. I'll think about it, I said. But understand that if you come to work in any of my businesses, you'll be treated like any other employee. No special treatment, no shortcuts. And if you don't perform, you'll be fired like anyone else. I understand. Do you really? Because the Evan I know has never faced consequences for failure. He flinched, but didn't look away. Then maybe it's time I did. My father had the hardest conversation. We met in the early evening on the terrace where we had shared cocktails earlier in the week. The setting was the same, but everything else had changed. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said, about what kind of father I've been, what kind of man. And I don't like the answers. I spent my whole life chasing status, measuring myself against other men, trying to build something impressive. And what do I actually have? A business that's stagnant, a family that fears me more than loves me, a daughter who built an empire while I was too busy judging her to notice. That's a harsh assessment. It's accurate. He stared out at the ocean. I told you your presence would lower our status. Do you know why I really said that? Why? Because I was jealous. Even then, before I knew about any of this, I could feel you becoming something I would never be. Independent, self-made, free of all the insecurities that have driven me my entire life, and I couldn't stand it. So you tried to diminish me. I tried to keep you small because my own smallness felt less obvious that way. He turned to face me. I'm ashamed of who I've been, Claire, truly ashamed. I had waited a long time to hear those words, but hearing them now, I realized they didn't change as much as I had expected. The wound had scarred over. The pain had been transformed into strength. His admission was meaningful, but it couldn't undo what had been done. I believe you, I said, and I appreciate you saying it, but I need you to understand something. What? This isn't about making you feel better. This isn't about absolution. If you want a different relationship with me, you have to build it through your actions, not your words, not your feelings. What you actually do from now on. I understand. Do you? Because the pattern of your life suggests otherwise? He nodded slowly. I'll show you, however long it takes. We'll see. It wasn't forgiveness? Not yet. But it was a door left slightly open. The final full day at the resort arrived with the kind of brilliant tropical morning that made everything seem possible. The sky was cloudless, the ocean calm, the air thick with the scent of flowers. I woke early as I always did and took a long walk along the beach. The week had been transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had come expecting to reveal my success and watch my family's discomfort. Instead, I had found something more complex, the possibility of actual change. Not certain to change, not guaranteed change, but possibility. Eleanor arrived mid-morning for a final legal session. We met in my suite documents spread across the dining table. I've drafted the boundaries you requested, she said, Employment terms if Evan wants to join, investment parameters if your parents want involvement, separation clauses if things don't work out. That's very thorough. It's necessary. Family and business are a volatile combination. Having clear structures protects everyone. We reviewed each document carefully. I made some modifications, asked questions about implications and contingencies. By the time we finished, I had a comprehensive framework for whatever came next. One more thing, Eleanor said as she gathered her papers. Have you thought about what you want to say at the farewell dinner tonight? There's a farewell dinner. Michael arranged it. A private dinner for you and your family to mark the end of the trip. He thought you might want to make some remarks. I hadn't planned on a speech, but the opportunity to set expectations to establish the new terms of engagement was valuable. I'll prepare something, I said. The afternoon passed in preparation. I wrote and rewrote my remarks, trying to find the balance between hope and caution, between opening doors and maintaining protections. It wasn't an easy balance. By evening, I had something that felt right. Not perfect, but honest. That would have to be enough. The farewell dinner was held in a private dining room overlooking the ocean. Candles flickered on white tablecloths. Crystal glasses caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. The room was elegant, without being ostentatious, beautiful without being intimidating. My family was already seated when I arrived. My mother looked nervous. My father looked resigned. Evan looked hopeful in a way that might have been genuine. I took my place at the head of the table, a position that would have been unthinkable a week ago. Thank you for being here, I began. This week has been different than I expected. For all of us, my mother said quietly. I came here with certain assumptions about how this would go. Most of them were wrong. I assumed you wouldn't listen. I assumed you wouldn't change. I assumed this trip would end with the same distance between us that has always existed. And now, my father asked. Now I'm not sure, and that uncertainty is actually more hopeful than the certainty I came with. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Here's what I want you to understand. My success isn't about proving you wrong. It's not about revenge or vindication. It's simply about building a life that makes sense to me, one that aligns with my values and uses my abilities. We see that now, Evan said. Maybe, but seeing it once isn't enough. The patterns of our family are deep and old. It would be easy to fall back into them, to return home and gradually revert to who we were before. We won't, my mother insisted. I hope not, but I'm not taking that on faith. I'm going to watch what you do, not what you say. I'm going to give you opportunities to prove that this week meant something. And if it turns out to be just a temporary performance, I'll know, and I'll adjust accordingly. My father spoke up. That's fair. More than fair, probably. We haven't earned trust. We have to rebuild it. Yes, you do. The meal arrived, course after beautiful course, each one a testament to the chef's skill and the resort's commitment to excellence. We ate and talked more openly than we ever had before. Old stories were re-examined with new understanding. Long-held assumptions were questioned and sometimes discarded. After dinner, I distributed copies of Eleanor's documents. These outline the terms if any of you want professional involvement with my businesses. Read them carefully. Ask questions if you have them, but understand that these boundaries are non-negotiable. My father flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. This is very thorough. I've learned that clarity prevents misunderstanding. I'd rather have difficult conversations now than painful conflicts later. That's wise. It's necessary. We talked late into the night, discussing possibilities and limitations, hopes and fears. By the time we said goodnight, something had shifted. The rigid hierarchies of our family had loosened, if not dissolved. The roles we had played for decades were being renegotiated. It wasn't a resolution. Resolution implied endings, and this was clearly a beginning. But it was a movement. Progress. A family that had been frozen in dysfunction was starting to thaw. Walking back to my suite, I felt lighter than I had in years. The stone I had carried for so long was still there, but it was smaller now, diminished by the simple act of truth-telling. Tomorrow we will fly home. The resort would continue without us, its staff providing perfect service, its guests enjoying temporary paradise. And my family would return to their lives, carrying the memory of this week and the choice of what to do with it. I had done what I could. The rest was up to them. The departure morning arrived with a sense of anticlimactic finality. Suitcases were packed, bills were settled, and the temporary world we had inhabited was dismantled with efficient precision. I stood on my balcony one last time watching the ocean and thinking about everything that had happened. A week ago, I had arrived as the dismissed daughter, the family afterthought, the one who would lower everyone's status. I was leaving as something else entirely. Not triumphant. Triumph implies a defeated enemy, and I didn't want my family to be my enemies, but certainly transformed, certainly seen, certainly acknowledged. My family gathered in the lobby, their luggage clustered around them like nervous attendants. The staff lined up to say goodbye, their farewell more formal and respectful than it would have been for ordinary guests. Michael Grant approached me with his usual professional warmth. "It's been a pleasure having you here, Ms. Hale. We look forward to your next visit." "Thank you, Michael, for everything." He nodded, understanding the layers beneath my words. This week has been about more than vacation or family drama. It had been about establishing truth, claiming space, and setting new terms for old relationships. My father watched our exchange with an expression I couldn't quite read. A week ago, he would have tried to insert himself into the conversation, to claim connection, to establish his own importance. Now he simply watched, accepting his position as observer rather than participant. The drive to the airport was quiet, but not uncomfortable. We sat together in the shuttle my family arranged around me in a configuration that would have been unthinkable before this trip. I was at the center, and everyone had adjusted their positions accordingly. At the airport, we navigated check-in and security together. No one suggested I handle things separately. No one implied that I belonged to a different tier. We moved through the process as a unit, if not unified, then at least united by the experience we had shared. On the flight, I sat with my family in business class. My father had quietly upgraded everyone, a small gesture that I recognized for what it was, an attempt to establish equality, to signal that everyone belonged at the same level. "Thank you," I said when we were settled. "It was the least I could do," he replied. Literally. I almost smiled at his self-awareness. The man who had always needed to be in charge was learning to acknowledge his limitations. My mother sat beside me, unusually quiet. Halfway through the flight, she turned to face me. "I want you to know something," she said. "These past few days, watching you in your element, seeing how people respond to you, it made me realize how much I missed." "What do you mean?" "I spent your whole childhood waiting for you to become like Evan, outgoing, social, easy. When you didn't, I thought something was wrong with you. I tried to fix you instead of accepting you." "I know. But I was wrong. There was nothing to fix. You were just different, and the difference turned out to be better." "Not better," I said gently. "Just different. Evan has his strengths too." "Maybe. But his strengths are the kind the world rewards easily. Yours are the kind you have to build everything around. That takes more courage." It was perhaps the most perceptive thing my mother had ever said about me. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot I had been carrying so long I had forgotten it was there. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I should have said it years ago, decades ago. I'm sorry I didn't." "You're saying it now. That's what matters." The rest of the flight passed in comfortable silence. We watched movies, read books, and dozed. A family doing normal family things, unremarkable to anyone observing from outside. But for us, it was remarkable. It was new. It was the beginning of something we hadn't known we needed. When we landed, the familiar chaos of the airport enveloped us. Baggage claim customs, the long walk to the parking structure where our cars waited. Real life reasserted itself with all its mundane demands. At the point where our paths diverged, we stopped for an awkward moment of farewell. "So," Evan said, "what now?" "Now we go home," I said, "and we see what happens." That's not very specific. Life rarely is. My mother hugged me, a real hug, rather than the performative embraces of the past. My father shook my hand, then pulled me into a brief, uncomfortable embrace that was clearly unfamiliar territory for him. "I meant what I said," he murmured. "I'm going to do better. Show me." "I will." We parted ways, each returning to our separate lives. The week at the resort was over. The real test was just beginning. In the days that followed, I watched for signs. Phone calls that weren't demanded, messages that weren't criticisms, invitations that weren't obligations, small gestures that indicated genuine change rather than temporary performance. Some came, not many at first, but some. My mother called to share a recipe she thought I might like. My father forwarded an article about business leadership with a note saying it reminded him of our conversations. Evan texted a photo of himself at a coffee shop studying for a certification exam he had decided to pursue. Small things. But small things accumulated into patterns, and patterns became habits, and habits became character. I didn't let my guard down entirely. Trust, once broken, rebuilds slowly. But I allowed myself cautious optimism. The family I had grown up in might not be the family I was going to have, and that possibility, fragile as it was, felt like its own kind of victory. 6 months after the Christmas trip, I sat in my office in the city, reviewing quarterly reports and thinking about everything that had changed. The resort was thriving. Occupancy rates were higher than ever, guest satisfaction scores had reached new peaks, and the expansion we had discussed was proceeding on schedule. The business I had built continued to grow, a testament to good decisions, hard work, and a little bit of luck. But the more significant changes were personal. My relationship with my family had evolved in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not into some idealized version of closeness, the kind you see in movies or greeting cards. Something more realistic, more honest, more sustainable. My mother and I talked regularly now, real conversations about our lives and thoughts and feelings. She had joined a book club and discovered that she had opinions worth sharing, perspectives that weren't just reflections of my father's views. She was becoming slowly and tentatively her own person. My father had started volunteering at a local nonprofit, using his business skills to help small organizations with their financial management. It wasn't glamorous work, and it certainly didn't enhance his status in the way he had always sought. But he seemed more settled than I had ever seen him, more at peace with himself and his place in the world. And Evan had surprised everyone, including himself. He had taken an entry-level position at a startup, refusing my father's offers of connections or favors. He was learning the business from the ground up, putting in long hours, accepting criticism, and slowly building something that was genuinely his own. None of this was easy. There were setbacks and conflicts, moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, times when I wondered if the changes would last. But the overall trajectory was positive. We were moving forward, however imperfectly. The Christmas trip had been a turning point, but it wasn't the whole story. Real change happened in the accumulated moments afterward, the daily choices to behave differently, to communicate more honestly, to value each other for who we actually were. I had spent years believing that my family would never see me clearly. That belief had protected me, given me the space to build my life without their interference. But it had also limited me, kept me isolated in ways I hadn't fully recognized. Now that isolation was ending. Not because my family had suddenly become perfect, but because they had shown a willingness to try, to grow, to acknowledge their mistakes and work to correct them. That willingness was what mattered. Not perfection, but effort. Not resolution, but progress. One evening I received a phone call from my father. He wanted to visit to see my office, to understand my work in a way he had never bothered to before. I agreed. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, looking out of place among the modern furniture and tech-focused decor. I gave him a tour, introduced him to my team, explained the projects we were working on. "This is impressive," he said, and for the first time the compliment didn't carry an undertone of surprise or condescension. It was simply an acknowledgement of reality. "Thank you. I'm proud of you, Claire. I should have said that years ago, decades ago, but I'm saying it now." "I know." We had dinner together that evening, just the two of us. We talked about business and family and the future. We disagreed about some things and agreed about others. We were two adults having a conversation, rather than a father lecturing and a daughter enduring. It wasn't the relationship I had once wanted with him. That opportunity had passed long ago, but it was a relationship I could live with, one based on reality rather than fantasy. As I drove home that night, I thought about the long journey from that Christmas dinner table to this point. The moment my father had told me my presence would lower their status, the rage and grief I had swallowed, the years of silent building, the revelation at the resort, and now this. I had never needed their approval to succeed. I had proved that beyond any doubt, but discovering that I could have their respect, their acknowledgement, their genuine appreciation, that was something I hadn't known I wanted until I received it. If you've ever been dismissed by the people who should have valued you most, I want you to know something. Your worth isn't determined by their blindness. Your success isn't validated by their approval. You can build a life that makes sense to you regardless of whether they ever understand it. But if they do eventually understand, if they do finally see you clearly, it's okay to let that matter. It's okay to accept their acknowledgement without compromising your independence. It's okay to rebuild relationships that were broken as long as you maintain your boundaries and protect what you've built. Family is complicated. Mine certainly is. But being complicated isn't the same as hopeless. Sometimes with enough time and enough honesty and enough willingness to change, complicated becomes something else, something that almost resembles what it should have been all along. I thought about sharing this story because I know there are others who have lived similar experiences, who have been the overlooked child, the dismissed sibling, the family member who never quite fit the expected mold, who have built their lives in spite of rather than because of their origins. If that's you, I hope my story offers some comfort, some recognition, some proof that you're not alone in what you've experienced. And if you're on the other side, if you're the parent or sibling who has dismissed someone without understanding their true worth, it's not too late. It's never too late to see clearly, to acknowledge mistakes, to begin the slow work of rebuilding what was broken. That work is worth doing. I'm grateful every day that my family finally started it. I hope you found something useful in my experience. If it resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories about karma family dynamics and the quiet power of building your own success, consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, remember, no one else gets to decide your worth. That determination belongs to you.